The trillion-dollar question for the West. How to rebuild a ruined Ukraine. Aside from Ukraine's recent staggering success on the battlefield, 8 months of war have left the country in physical, financial and economic turmoil. Millions of refugees have fled, the country's gross domestic product has shrunk by about a third, and the war-ravaged government is running a deficit of more than $4 billion a month. For teachers, retirees on pensions and millions of others, Ukraine would remain weak for years even if Russia withdrew now. Before Russian President Vladimir Putin dropped rockets on Ukrainian power plants and other installations this month, the cost of repairing damage to the country's critical infrastructure was already around $200 billion, according to a study by the Kyiv University of Economics. It was estimated at US dollars. And that's just a small part of the total destruction caused by the indiscriminate attack on Moscow. Rebuilding one of Europe's largest countries in terms of population and area will be a challenge for generations. Vlad Rashkovin, former deputy governor of the Central Bank of Ukraine and now representing the country on the executive committee of the International Monetary Fund, said, "We cannot rebuild the whole country every day. Department economists estimate the $1 trillion problem who will pay for it. The US and Europe, along with international banks and development agencies, must play a leading and shared role. It won't work. For Ukraine to thrive, it needs to reform and significantly restructure as a viable candidate for European Union membership that can leverage its power to implement reforms. This means that Ukraine's reconstruction will depend on more than cash and concrete things, but both will require enormous amounts. It will change the way of thinking and governing a nation notorious for even before filming ceased. The country committed itself to a permanent, impregnable and transparent project to transform ministries, markets, courts, corporations, and institutions to bring them up to Western democratic and free market standards. Must start. Easier said than done, of course. Pre-war Ukraine aspired to join the EU, much like a C student aspired to join the Ivy League. Transparency International ranks it as her third most corrupt country in Europe, behind Russia and Azerbaijan. When asked recently about the state of corruption in Ukraine after months of civil war, the country's top pro-reformist simply replied, "The good thing is that there is no money." Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, rightfully hailed as an inspirational war leader, has been ineffective at best for his first 3 years in office, as he refused the very promise of bribery that elected him in 2019. The second prime minister to be sacked in 2020 said Zelensky fired him because the government's anti-corruption efforts threatened wealthy rulers close to the president. In recent years, hundreds of millions of dollars of state money and foreign aid have been siphoned off by oligarchs who, with government acquiescence, used thousands of Ukrainian state-owned enterprises as ATMs. As humanitarian efforts accelerate, reforms must begin. They are not only the key to guiding Ukraine on the long road to the EU. Membership not only a very rigorous process, but also to let Western governments and multilateral institutions know that their aid money is not being siphoned off by oligarchs and kleptocrats. Ukraine has launched an impressive reconstruction plan. Thousands of officials and several task forces are working on plans to rebuild homes, roads, transportation hubs, factories, communication towers, and water and sewage systems. Even as the West provides money, weapons and supplies to wage an existential war with Russia, their own court coverage should be accompanied by growing international attention to Ukraine's long-term needs. Western leaders can't be bothered to decide who will oversee and coordinate the hundreds of billions of dollars that will be needed over time. Likely candidates include the G7, World Bank, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and the EU. Someone has to make a decision, and immediately. At the same time, Ukraine needs to realize that Western aid is highly conditional and could lead to a gradual increase in the tsunami of subsidies and soft loans that Kyiv officials want. Will disappoint Ukrainians in the department. But given the political and economic pressures donors are grappling with, energy inflation, nationalism and war weariness, this is a reality. So far, commitments to rebuild Afghanistan have fallen short of UN goals. Her €9 billion pledged by the EU earlier this year to cover Ukraine's monthly budget shortfall has so far yielded only a fraction of that amount. Ukrainians rightly want the Russian assets frozen by the West, including $300 billion in deposits from the Central Bank of Russia, to be used for reconstruction projects. No question. Moscow should pay war reparations. But there are legal, financial and political hurdles along the way. Even if some Russian assets could be confiscated or extracted through negotiations to help rebuild Ukraine, that would likely take years. Other moves could be made faster. Western countries are already sending massive aid packages to address pressing issues beyond the battlefield. In August, the State Department announced an $89 million grant to neutralize hundreds of thousands of Russian mines scattered over an area larger than Virginia and Maryland combined. Another important step is the establishment of an insurance fund supported by international financial institutions to encourage private sector investment.